Hello friends, it's me, Adam, here again to talk about my vinyl collection.
There's always been Ethel. Jacob, wake up, we got to tidy your room now.
I know in my last update I talked about some bands that are close to the edge of that progressive genre that I seem to be very, very interested in. And diving into the G section of my vinyl collection, there's just no way around it. And to kick things off, I want to show you this Genesis album from 1973, Selling England by the Pound. Now this is the classic progressive era Genesis lineup with Peter Gabriel on lead vocal and Phil Collins is still on drums, and this is actually when Steve Hackett was still in the band. When I first heard this album, I wasn't crazy about it. I've often compared Genesis and Yes, two bands that were more or less contemporary. Both bands went into a more pop sensible phase during the 80s or so. And I've always said that Yes did prog better than Genesis, but Genesis did pop better than Yes. And while that may be true, that was no excuse for not getting into this album. I don't know why I had missed out on this album. It's wonderful. My copy is kind of beat up, but it still plays really nicely and is one of my most recent favorite progressive rock albums, so it's definitely something to look into. Okay, next up I have another Genesis album, their 1974 release, The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. Now this is a double LP concept album that I, to be very honest, have not spent a lot of time with. I have at least one friend who is very into this album, and I keep meaning to spend some time with it, but it's such a large piece of music that I haven't been able to give it the attention that it deserves. I just need to bite the bullet and spend some time with this album. I'm glad to have it, but I don't really have anything else to say about it. Next up, I have another Genesis album, their 1976 release, A Trick of the Tail. Now this is still during the progressive period of Genesis, but by the time this album was released, Peter Gabriel had left from the band and Phil Collins was taking all of the lead vocals. This is still a really enjoyable piece of progressive music. It may not be to the quality level of Selling England by the Pound or possibly even The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, but there are some fantastic songs here. Okay, next up is Genesis 1980 Duke. Now, this is an album that I have purposefully avoided for one incredibly shallow reason, and that is that the album art is awful. I've looked at this and thought, this looks stupid, which was a huge mistake. I gave this album a listen and found it to be really, really great. This is Genesis starting to transition into being a more pop sensible, a more listenable band. There are notable singles on here like Misunderstanding and Turn It On Again, both of which are very radio friendly, but the album itself has some very progressive tendencies in its composition, and in recent months I've spent a lot of time listening to this album, and I certainly recommend that you do the same. I have Genesis, their 1978 release, and then there were three. It's not their best album, and it certainly showcases a turbulent time in their lineup and perhaps a turbulent time in the quality of their music. Not that it's not a good album, not a great album. Next up I have Genesis Three Sides Live. This is a live album from 1982. As the name suggests, this is Genesis as a three-piece. This is them after having released, and then there were three. They are down to just Phil Collins on drums and lead vocals, Mike Rutherford playing bass and guitar, and Tony Banks playing all the keyboard stuff. Genesis has always been a very good band live, very solid. I enjoy watching footage of their live show, and this is a fun record to listen to if you like listening to live music. Next up, another Genesis album, the 1983 release, self-titled, or some people refer to it as the Shapes album or the Gold Shapes album. This is actually the first Genesis album that I ever bought on vinyl because it has one of my very favorite Genesis songs on it, Mama, which is a really dark, creepy, almost, in certain parts of the song. It's also got the single That's All, which got some radio play. This is still Genesis being very pop sensible, but there are some progressive tendencies here, which I think show with songs like Home by the Sea and Second Home by the Sea, a couple of tracks that present similar melodic features. And this is a fun album for a lot of reasons. I like it. And the last album in my vinyl collection in my G section is Grizzly Bear's Veckatimest, which is one of my favorite albums from 2009, a all-around fantastic indie rock album. This particular copy makes me kind of sad because I made the mistake of buying this album used on the internet, and it's slightly damaged. Oh, frustrating. This album is wonderful. If you like indie music, if you like lush arrangements, then this is an album that you need to listen to. Just do it. Just go out, buy it on iTunes, go buy a copy of this on CD or vinyl or whatever, get this album and listen to it. It's so good. It's got some very pop sensible tracks like 2 Weeks, which was the single from this album. I saw this band live at Lollapalooza in 2010 and got a very strong Yes vibe from them. And I'm not sure where that stems from, but it certainly explains on some subconscious level why I love this band so much and why this album is so good. Oh, so good. All right, that's all of the albums that I'm going to talk about today. There's still more to go, so stick around. In the meantime, follow me on Twitter. I'll put some information in the video description below. Go ahead and follow me on Twitter. Feel free to ask me some questions because, like I've said before, eventually I'm going to run out of records to talk about. And if you want me to keep doing this, then send me some questions. In the meantime, peace out.